to the first edition of The Roundup. Real Media and Phoenix Media Cooperative have teamed up to release a regular newsletter which seeks to provide bold, accurate, accessible journalism which is unashamedly global in its outlook and subversive. A key part of this is covering and sharing the work of people who are resisting and organising against marginalisation, oppression and destruction. Together, we will highlight and amplify the efforts of these people who are struggling in the UK and around the world to forge a better world, something that we know the majority of news outlets do not do. This week, there's direct action against Liverpool's arm fair. There's been more climate action pushing for urgent home insulation across the UK, and the work of fight back against Uber continues to grow. More on those stories later, though, because now we begin with a Real Media interview marking 20 years of the occupation in Afghanistan. This comes 2 months after the originally CIA and MI6-backed fundamentalist militia, the Taliban, retook control of the country. Maya Evans volunteered for many years with the Afghanistan Peace Project. She visited the country on numerous occasions, working with grassroots groups to amplify the voices of women and children. And in a wide-reaching interview with Real Media, she speaks about the realities of life for poor, rural people under the Taliban, the ethnic divisions in the country, and the growth of opium production and the associated corruption under the noses of occupying forces.
In the last 10 years, opium has quadrupled, mainly because of the use of solar power. So for farmers, it's I think it's about $500 will get you a sort of a small sort of field of solar panels, which will allow you to pump water from under the desert, and you can then irrigate parts of this dry desert to grow this very lucrative crop. So that has enabled very high quality, cheap opium to flood the international market. So 90% of the world's opium comes from Afghanistan. And in the country, it was very evident when I visited Kabul. You would see these the opium addicts underneath the bridge. So when we hear on the TV, I was watching the parliamentary debate, and the politicians, many of them saying, oh, well, you know, our streets are safer because we went in 20 years ago and we defeated Al-Qaeda. Well, we didn't defeat Al-Qaeda, did we? But they claiming that our streets were safer. But very few people are making the link between the impact of foreign occupation and the flood of opium in this country. And so Britain has a direct responsibility for the production of opium, in that in 2001 at the Bonn conference, Britain was delegated the responsibility for counter narcotics. And Helmand province is one of the areas that the majority of the opium is produced. And, you know, I've spoken to a lot of veterans, and they will talk about how they were in Helmand and they knew all about the opium production. This is pre-2010, some of these veterans. And they said, well, they would go and visit farmers, and it would normally be the farmers who had fallen out of favour with the local warlord who the British were working with. So as long as you had remained in favour with the local warlord that was in with the British military, you'd be left alone. But it was only, you know, you'd only be disturbed if you were not paying your taxes to the local warlords. There's another aspect of how foreign occupation really reinforced corruption and these elite individuals, often warlords with blood on their hands from the Civil War. They were hand-picked by the US to run the country simply because they weren't Taliban and because they were willing to work with the US and NATO. So it's just one disaster after another, and the common thread being that the ordinary Afghan person was never prioritized. Their humanity was never prioritized. Their welfare was never prioritized.
Since the withdrawal of troops, 95% of the population is facing food insecurity. But the UK Home Office is already deporting Afghan refugees on the basis that they face no real risk of harm. You can watch the whole interview in the link below. Check it out. Moving on, the Liverpool Arms Fair was in town this week, and people in the city hit the streets at the weekend to highlight their opposition, with more protests and direct action during the 3-day event at the start of this week. Among the actions, protesters turned the Liverpool fountain red ahead of the arms fair. One of the companies exhibiting electronic warfare equipment at the event is Elbit Systems, which has been the target of bold actions and occupations by the Palestine Action Group for more than a year. On Monday night, Palestine actionists managed to occupy the roof of the event's venue, and despite the antisocial behaviour dispersal notices, supporters have continued to show their solidarity around the site.
I'm on a roof today to try and stop the Liverpool Arms Fair, where companies who test their weapons on Palestinian children, a majority children population in Palestine, and just blast them and then advertise them as battle tested on battles when it's not a battle, it's a kid, isn't it? So we want to end that.
In London this week, there was more action from Insulate Britain campaigners. Dozens of people blocked roads, continuing their call for government action on home insulation.
I said it's a bit inconvenient, but I'm not angry about what they're doing. Do you know what I mean? Because, like that guy was saying, it's for the benefit of all of us. And governments around the world don't like it because they're shining a light on them.
Insulate Britain's disruptive tactics have sparked a debate about what kind of action is acceptable to create change. What do you think? Let us know in the comments. Uber had already faced strike action in recent weeks, and this week wasn't any easier for the company. This is because Black Lives Matter joined the IWGB union-supported Uber drivers striking outside the company's UK headquarters. The workers insist that Uber's algorithm discriminates against drivers with darker skin. If you do use Uber, you may want to let it know what you think about its behaviour. In Europe, there were fascist attacks on Italy's biggest trade union federation, and Italian unions have called for mass anti-fascist protest on the 16th of October to counter the actions of the far right. And over in the US, workers are standing up en masse. Kellogg's workers, for example, were striking for equal pay. School bus drivers in Annapolis have also been organising. Communications workers in California, meanwhile, rallied against unfair labour practices, as did hospital workers in Oregon. And in one of the biggest potential actions, tens of thousands of behind-the-scenes workers in Hollywood could soon go on strike. We are just touching the surface of action that's going on across the US here. What stories do you think that are important we might have missed? And more generally, we want to expand this newsletter to look beyond the US and Europe. What movements, actions and moments would you like us to cover? Until the next one, I've been Thomas Barlow, and this has been the Roundup from Real Media and Phoenix Media Cooperative. Join us next week for a bit more. And please, like, subscribe, leave us some messages in the comments. See you next time.